Malaysia handing over the baton to the Philippines as it marked the end of the 47th ASEAN summit, with Manila set to assume the chairmanship on the 1st of January next year. Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim officially passing the role to Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Junior during a ceremony in Kuala Lumpur. As the next chair, the Philippines will be host to a number of the bloc's meetings and will be in charge of steering regional talks. And for more, we're joined by AP correspondent Maria Ronson. She's speaking to us live from Metro Manila. Maria, what have been the top priorities of President Marcos at this year's ASEAN summit that we know of, and how might these reflect Manila's priorities?
The priorities that the Philippines had set up for 2025 almost mirrors their goals for 2026. So the buzzword here is continuity. For 2026, the Philippines hopes to do the following: strengthen security in the region and also enhance economic cooperation among member countries, broaden engagement with dialogue partners such as the US, China, Japan, and India, to name a few, and focus on regional concerns such as the problems in Myanmar and the Thai-Cambodia border, and determine economic uncertainties. But their primary goal is to conclude an effective and legally binding Code of Conduct, otherwise known as COC, with China on the South China Sea, which has been on the negotiating table for more than 2 decades. As has been widely reported, China has not accepted the 2016 arbitral findings, which has been seen by many as a triumph for the Philippines, as it invalidated China's historic claims on the South China Sea. So expect the road to final signing of the COC on the South China Sea to be turbulent, to say the least. Apart from getting China on board, all 11 ASEAN members have to be backing this agreement. An easier path to navigate would be the economic goals within the region. One project being considered is an ASEAN power grid, the region's power grid initiative, integrating the region's power needs. This project seems to tick all the right boxes for what President Ferdinand Marcos Junior has asserted will be his focus on hosting ASEAN in 2026, to be practical, inclusive, and aim for measurable initiatives.
All right, Maria, you've actually outlined the sorts of where it might be easier for ASEAN and where it might not be so easy for the Philippine chairmanship next year. But what would you say are the obstacles, the major ones, beyond what you have already pointed out?
The developments in South China Sea is the most important, of course, because apart from these disputed waters being a rich source of natural resources and fish for the livelihood of fishermen in these seas, it is an important trade route, and the fact that it should be opened at all times and accessible to everyone is paramount. The second is the situation in Myanmar. The third is the threats to regional peace and maritime security, and the far-reaching impact of climate change and economic volatility. And one other challenge is to achieve one of their goals around the concept of ASEAN centrality. That is, for ASEAN to be the main platform for dialogue in the region, and that means regional issues are addressed within rather than being dominated by outside major powers. With the US and China flexing their muscle in the region through trade tariffs, economic might, and skirmishes in the South China Sea, setting ASEAN centrality as a goal when the Philippines takes over the ASEAN in 2026 will be something worth watching.
Our thanks to the AP correspondent Maria Ronson joining us live there from Metro Manila. And more on what we can expect from the Philippine chairmanship, we're joined by Professor Aris Arugai. He's visiting senior fellow and coordinator at the Philippine Studies Program at ICE's Yusof Ishak Institute. He speaks to us from Manila. Professor Arugai, we just heard from Maria there. So she feels that on economic issues, it might be easier for any ASEAN chair, and far more difficult, according to far more turbulent, is reaching any agreement on how to settle dispute over territory in the South China Sea. Malaysia, on this matter, very little progress. Is this going to be changing when the Philippines takes over 1st January?
Right. There's this idea that if you are chair of ASEAN, you don't really put your issues at the forefront of the agenda of the regional bloc. The idea comes from the notion that ASEAN chairmanships should be about consensus building, should be about issues that traverses the challenges of all its previously 10, now 11 members. So I think while the Philippines, it would be quite obvious for it to push forward, for example, with the COC, with acting in concert as far as maritime security issues are concerned, particularly with what was mentioned by President Marcos. I really think that the Philippine chairmanship will really focus on what could be consensus issues. And that's correct. Economic might be one of them, despite, of course, the increasing challenges with the US tariffs and other geoeconomics. But let's pay attention also to the fact what was mentioned, that the Philippines will focus more on ASEAN issues, particularly peace and security issues like Myanmar and even the Thai-Cambodian conflict or border conflict.
So ironically, given that we've seen the Philippines be rather more robust relative to other ASEAN member states in terms of contesting any Chinese perceived assertiveness in the South China Sea. In fact, as ASEAN chair, we might see the Philippines be more restrained than it has been in the past, even at this current summit.
Right. I think this is also because, let's remember, the last time the Philippines has become quite assertive in calling out Chinese aggression was in 2012. It wasn't the chair, it was Cambodia, but that was also the only year that ASEAN was unable to release a chairman's statement. And that means that I think the Philippines has learned from that lesson. And the idea here that as chair, your job is not really to put solely your interest and what could be perceived as mutually exclusive interest at the forefront, because that will further not put ASEAN interests as the priority, rather your own as chairmanship. And the practice might set off a dangerous precedent that therefore each member country will try to use and disabuse even its chairmanship position to put forward its issues to the alienation of the rest of the body collective.
All right, Professor Arugay, last week, in fact, we spoke to the Philippine Foreign Secretary, and we asked her very specifically how she expects any code of conduct to be reached by the newly imposed deadline of 2026. And of course, there are lots of issues on very basic matters like legality, the scope of application. Let's take a listen to what Secretary Lazaro had to say. This was Monday of last week.
Let me go back to 2023, wherein the foreign ministers at that time have come up with a resolution that the Code of Conduct, ASEAN-China Code of Conduct, should finish at least 3 years, and that will be 2026. 2026 is the year of our chairship. Since Malaysia took over as the chair, there had been several meetings, discussions on a level of the working group, as well as the SOM, the senior officials meeting. But we still have time. We intend to continue with the joint working group meetings, to continue and try to look at still the possibility of having this code of conduct.
Professor Arugay, Secretary Lazaro, they're saying she still thinks there might be the possibility of having this code of conduct. Do you see a possibility by the end of 2026?
Right. It has lagged this long, you're correct, from the Declaration of Code of Conduct in 2002. I think in one interview, the secretary mentioned that it would be aspirational if it gets to be concluded in 2026, coincidentally with the Philippine chairmanship. But it seems that indications that when the foreign ministers made that commitment in 2023, the region was still different as it is right now. The region is more challenged, not only geopolitically, but geoeconomically as well. There's a lot of issues at the table apart from the COC. And I think the Philippines, as chair of ASEAN, will be very sensitive to these issues that are being confronted by ASEAN, apart from what is happening right in its maritime zones in the South China Sea. So while that possibility remains there, I do think that it has lagged this long, and it wouldn't be, for me, surprising if it will take a bit more time, given that developments have there are developments that have occurred, and there are other issues that ASEAN might want to focus its energies on by next year.
Professor Arugai, in fact, Secretary Lazaro speaking today in an interview saying she is committed to prioritizing the bloc's collective interests over the Philippines' own bilateral concerns. So in keeping with what you're saying, that final question here, if the Philippines chooses to focus on other issues that might be more promising in terms of progress and actual progress and moving forward for ASEAN, which issues might they be? If you could just pick maybe one or two for us. Final question.
Right. I think at the moment, ASEAN is really feeling the crunch. It used to be just geopolitical in terms of the U.S.-China rivalry, but now it has become economic and political in nature. And I think the Philippines would want to see a stronger ASEAN acting in concert in making sure that its collective economic interests are defended. So I think for the Philippines, if there's actual progress, the lowest hanging fruit will be to somehow strengthen its economic resilience despite increasing economic challenges with the tariffs, with other geoeconomic challenges. So therefore, I think in rallying behind being able to sustain economic growth and being able to at least economically be still a viable, dynamic trading bloc, the Philippines' chairmanship will be ensuring that ASEAN becomes economic resilient by 2026.
And there would be a bloc that is unusually dependent on traders. So that's in keeping with that. Thanks for that, Professor Aris Arugai. He's visiting Senior Fellow and Coordinator at the Philippine Studies Program at ICE's Yusof Ishak Institute.